What if I told you there's a childhood illness that pretty much disappears? Like it vanishes before a kid's second birthday.
Hmm.
Sounds a little strange, right?
Yeah, you would think a baby's immune system would be,
Uh, well, more vulnerable.
But that's the case with rheumatic fever. It's a serious complication from strep throat. But it seems to have an age limit.
Huh.
And you've sent us a ton of research on this going back almost a century. So today we're going to do a deep dive into this medical mystery, and try to figure out why this disease consistently skips over infants and toddlers.
It really is a fascinating puzzle. The fact that this pattern has been observed for so long
Yeah.
just makes it even more intriguing.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back in time, back to the 1920s and 30s.
Okay.
Okay, back then, medical technology wasn't as advanced, but doctors were already starting to notice something peculiar. Kids were getting rheumatic fever after strep throat, but babies almost never did.
Right.
It was like this disease had some kind of invisible barrier, protecting the youngest among us. Yes. Even in those early days, researchers like Jones and Coburn were documenting this unusual pattern, which really laid the groundwork for decades of investigation.
And as medicine progressed, this age-related trend only became more evident. We got better at diagnosing strep, we studied more children, gathered data from all over the globe, but the results were the same. Babies just weren't getting rheumatic fever. And multiple studies throughout the mid-20th century confirmed this, really solidifying this understanding within the medical community.
What's fascinating is that this pattern held true, regardless of location or socioeconomic factors. One study even spanned 5 continents, and it showed that babies remained largely unaffected by rheumatic fever.
That's incredible. So naturally, researchers were determined to uncover the reason behind this mysterious protection. Why were babies seemingly immune to this serious complication? And two main theories emerged. One focused on the possibility that babies might carry some of their mother's immunity, like acting as a temporary shield, passed down during infancy.
Right. And this idea of borrowed immunity is pretty common in early childhood. Babies get a lot of protection from their moms in those first few months.
That makes sense. But there was another theory too, right? Something about the baby's own immune system.
Exactly. The second theory suggested that a baby's immune system might not be mature enough to trigger the same inflammatory response. That leads to rheumatic fever in older kids.
So either they're borrowing defenses from mom, or their own system isn't developed enough to overreact in the same way. Either way, they're protected.
Precisely. And researchers like Ayub, and more recently Ralph and Karapetis, dedicated their work to exploring these ideas, trying to pinpoint the specific biological mechanisms at play.
Okay, so we've got this age-related pattern, but here's where it gets really interesting. This understanding had a huge impact on how doctors treated kids. They realized that routine strep testing for babies wasn't really necessary.
This was a major shift in clinical practice. Why test for a risk that simply isn't there?
It makes you wonder how many unnecessary tests and treatments were avoided. Because of this discovery, doctors could then focus their resources on the older kids who were actually at risk.
Absolutely. And this approach is reflected in guidelines from major medical organizations, like the American Academy of Pediatrics. We also see it in research from prominent pediatricians like Catanzaro and Schulman, all emphasizing a targeted approach based on age-related risk.
So doctors stopped routinely testing babies for strep. But was this just a trend in developed countries with better healthcare?
Not at all. The amazing thing is this pattern held true around the world. Even in regions with limited healthcare access and higher rates of strep throat, babies weren't getting rheumatic fever. Studies by Kaplan and Karapetis, McDonald, and Wilson demonstrate just how universal this finding is. It truly points to a fundamental biological mechanism that transcends geographical boundaries.
That's mind-blowing. So we've established that this pattern is undeniable. But the exact biological reasons behind it, the how and the why of this baby shield, are still somewhat of a mystery.
That's right. It remains an active area of research. However, a recent study from Korea offers a fascinating clue. Researchers found that even though strep tests were often performed on children under 3, those tests were almost always negative.
Wait, hold on a second. Meaning it's not just about doctors not looking for rheumatic fever in babies.
Yeah,
There's something fundamentally different about how their bodies handle the infection in the first place.
exactly. And this leads us down an even deeper rabbit hole. Because while babies might be protected from rheumatic fever, there's another strep-related condition they are susceptible to.
Oh, this is where it gets tricky. What's this other condition?
It's called perianal streptococcal dermatitis. Essentially, it's a skin infection that occurs around the diaper area.
Okay, so while they might dodge the bullet of rheumatic fever, it seems strep found another, shall we say, less glamorous way to cause trouble. Tell me more about this perianal strep. What should parents be looking out for?
Well, perianal strep can be a bit sneaky. It often presents as a rash around the diaper area with redness, irritation, and
No.
sometimes even a bit of bleeding.
So it could easily be mistaken for a regular diaper rash,
Yeah.
or even like a fungal infection.
Precisely. That's why it's so important for parents and healthcare providers to be aware of this condition. It's not as dramatic as rheumatic fever, but it can be quite uncomfortable for babies and can sometimes lead to more serious complications if left untreated.
So how do you tell the difference between a simple diaper rash and this perianal strep?
That's where a doctor's expertise comes in. They can take a culture swab of the affected area to confirm the presence of strep bacteria, and sometimes there are subtle clues that can raise suspicion.
Like what?
Well, for example, perianal strep tends to be more sharply defined than a typical diaper rash. It might have a more distinct border, and the skin might be a bit more raw. Also, babies with perianal strep might be a bit fussier or have some mild gastrointestinal issues.
So if the rash is stubborn, it doesn't respond to the usual diaper rash creams, or if the baby seems extra uncomfortable, it's definitely worth getting it checked out.
Absolutely. And the good news is that perianal strep is easily treated with antibiotics. Once the right diagnosis is made, it usually clears up pretty quickly.
Okay, so we've covered the two ends of the spectrum here. Rheumatic fever, which babies rarely get, and perianal strep, which they are susceptible to. But let's go back to that Korean study for a moment. The one that found strep tests were mostly negative in kids under 3. You mentioned it leads us down a deeper rabbit hole. How so?
What's truly fascinating is that this study hints at a possible explanation for why babies might be less vulnerable to strep throat infections in general, not just the complication of rheumatic fever.
Now, this is where my brain starts to bend a little. So they're protected from rheumatic fever, and now we're saying they might be less likely to get the infection that leads to it in the first place.
It certainly seems that way. The study authors Dr. Woojum Do and Dr. Soo-Han Choi proposed several intriguing possibilities. One idea is that babies might have a different mix of bacteria living in their throats compared to older kids.
Hold on, I need a little clarification here. We're talking about the throat microbiome, right? What exactly is that?
Ah, yes, good point. The throat microbiome refers to the community of bacteria that naturally reside in our throats. It's like a miniature ecosystem with a diverse population of microorganisms.
Okay, so babies have a different mix of bacteria in their throats. How does that protect them from strep?
Well, imagine it like this. The strep bacteria, to cause an infection, need to attach to the lining of the throat. But if the existing bacterial community in a baby's throat is less hospitable to strep, it might be harder for them to gain a foothold and multiply.
So it's like a turf war, when have good bacteria and bad bacteria. And the good guys are winning in babies' throats.
That's a great way to visualize it. And this idea of the microbiome playing a role in immune defense is a hot topic in research these days. We're learning more and more about how the trillions of bacteria living in and on our bodies influence our health.
Fascinating stuff. But the study authors mention another possibility too, right? Something about a different immune response in babies.
Exactly. They suggested that babies might have a unique immune response in their throats, perhaps producing antibodies or other protective molecules that prevent strep from colonizing effectively.
So either they have a stronger defense system, or the strep bacteria just don't find baby throats as appealing. Either way, it's pretty remarkable.
It is. And this opens up exciting avenues for future research. If we can understand how babies manage to keep strep at bay, it could potentially lead to new ways to prevent strep throat in older kids and adults.
Wow, that would be a game changer. But for now, it seems like babies have this amazing, somewhat mysterious way of handling strep that we're only just beginning to understand.
Absolutely. And it reinforces the idea that the early years of life are a critical period for immune system development.
Speaking of immune system development, it's always been a bit of a head scratcher for me.
What's that?
If babies are so good at fighting off strep, why do they seem to be more susceptible to other infections, like ear infections and colds?
That's an excellent question. It's true that babies do get hit with a lot of those common childhood illnesses, and it might seem contradictory considering how well they handle strep, but there are a few factors at play here.
So what's the deal? Why are they rock stars at fighting off strep, but then get knocked down by a simple cold?
Well, first, their immune systems are still maturing. While they have some innate immunity and antibodies passed down from their mothers, They're still building up their own repertoire of immune cells and responses.
So they're still learning the ropes when it comes to fighting off infections.
Exactly. And then you have to consider the anatomy of babies and young children. Their eustachian tubes, which connect the middle ear to the back of the throat, are shorter and more horizontal than in adults.
Making it easier for those nasty germs to travel up and cause ear infections.
Right. Plus, babies spend a lot of time lying down, which can also contribute to fluid buildup in the ears.
Okay, so anatomy plays a role.
Hmm.
What about exposure? Babies are constantly putting things in their mouths,
Yeah.
interacting with other kids. They're basically germ magnets.
Absolutely. Exposure to a wide range of viruses and bacteria is actually essential for a healthy immune system development. It's like a training ground for their immune cells.
So those sniffles and sneezes, while no fun for anyone, are actually helping them build up their defenses in the long run.
Precisely. And that brings us back to this incredible journey we've taken exploring strep infections.
We started with this century-old observation that babies rarely get rheumatic fever.
And along the way, we uncovered some surprising insights into the unique ways babies interact with strep bacteria.
We learned that they might have a different mix of bacteria in their throats, making it harder for strep to take hold.
And they might even have a unique immune response in their throats, preventing strep from colonizing effectively.
It's almost as if they have this double layer of protection, both at the bacterial level and the immune system level.
Right.
Really fascinating stuff. And then there's that perianal strep dermatitis, a reminder that strep can still pose a threat to babies, just in a different way.
It highlights the importance of awareness and careful observation, especially when it comes to those less obvious infections.
So what can we take away from all of this?
Well, for one, it's a reminder that the human body, especially in its early stages of development, is an incredibly complex and adaptable system.
We've come a long way in understanding how babies' immune systems work, but there's still so much to discover.
Absolutely. And research like the Korean study we discussed is paving the way for new insights and potential breakthroughs in preventing and treating strep infections.
It's also a reminder that even seemingly simple childhood illnesses can be fascinating from a scientific perspective.
Each sniffle, cough, and rash tells a story about our intricate relationship with the microscopic world around us.
This has been a truly captivating deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little smarter and maybe even a little more awestruck by the incredible resilience of babies.
I couldn't agree more. And it's a testament to the power of scientific inquiry and the importance of never stopping to ask questions.
Well said. To our listeners, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those curious minds engaged.